Hello fellows, welcome to Life Study Library. This is your host Lai Yosh. In this channel, I'll be talking about interesting topics on science and psychology that might greatly benefit you and your life. So if you're interested, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Life Study Library. Thank you, and let's get going with today's video. Also unrelated, but my audio quality got really better, so yay. Today we're going to get back to basics. We're going to talk about the science and psychology of anxiety. I'll first start the video by talking about why that fast beating heart or the sweaty hands or the tingly feeling you have every time you have to do something that you don't feel fully comfortable. I'll first explain why feeling and experiencing all these, despite what it seems like, psychologically and scientifically speaking, isn't actually a bad thing. This way, you'll be able to actually appreciate the anxious feeling instead of trying so hard to deny it or resist it and try to hide it away until it comes back at the worst time possible and result in an even worse catastrophe. Then I'll be talking about some specific pathways that you can take in which you might actually benefit from having anxiety. I understand that even if I say that having anxiety or anxious feelings is in fact a good thing, I understand that my claim seems unconvincing, but I might be able to at least put you at ease by talking about the existence of specific careers or jobs that require you to have anxious feelings. So even if you do not feel convinced from my first point of the video, you'll still be able to know that what you've always thought of as a disadvantage can be used as a huge advantage that sets you apart from other people who do not experience anxiety like you do. Okay, enough with this. Let's talk about the main point. So let's start with the basic concept of anxiety and where many people get the wrong idea about it. I don't think I'm saying nonsense when I say that most people think of anxiety or the feeling of it as something that should be eliminated from your life. Like, you're probably thinking that anxiety or any other form of nervousness, so like the jitter or the sweaty hands, stuttering, negative feeling, I can pretty confidently hypothesize that you are thinking of these things as a bad thing that disables you from performing well. And you're probably thinking that these negative behaviors stem from the anxious emotion, so this emotion must be purged. Well, this might surprise many people, and you might not initially agree with me, but allow me to drop a bomb and say that this anxious feeling itself is not a bad thing, and in fact is a sign that you're functioning properly. How is this so? Well, firstly, anxiety, or the anxious feeling at least, is actually a form of defense mechanism that we've developed over our human history that can help you a lot during situations of an emergency. Think about it. Back in the age where we didn't have any modern technology to defend ourselves, so back in the age where we didn't have any guns or missiles, and the only weapon we had were things like sword or spear or maybe bow and arrow, but usually clubs or just throwing stones. And we also had to hunt to survive and get food. So we had to fight and kill other animals to feed. And we also had to fear becoming a dinner to some large and dangerous animal. During these situations where we literally had our lives in the line just in order to see another day, it's not too surprising to imagine that our emotional state was at a constant high alert, right? We always had to be wary of our surroundings, had to be careful not to carelessly jump in the pond because that pond might have some large ferocious animal that could easily eat us, or that bush over there might be hiding a predator that could easily kill us if they wanted to, because humans never had any biological weapons like sharp claws. Knowing that our ancestors are literally at constant danger like this, how could anyone not become wary and mindlessly wander off into a nearby bush just because there might be some food, or mindlessly explore just because that nearby dark forest seems interesting? Humans had to be wary and act conservatively just to live, and this habitual trait was taught and learned from generations to generations, and the gene that made us more cautious lived on while adventurous genes died. And it sure took a long time for us to develop and evolve enough to be sitting at the top of the food chain in the modern era. And now, most of us listening to this podcast at least do not have to worry about being eaten by large predators. However, this leaves an issue for us. Even though we don't have to worry about being in constant danger, so we don't really need to always be up on our toes, that trait that got passed on from generations to generations is still here. even though many of us are living a life without any immediate danger, at least not to a level where our ancestors were in. Because our modern development of things like technology that protects us developed so sharply in such a short time when compared to much of the earlier stages of human history. Because of this, our mind and body have not yet adjusted to the safeness of our world. This is why anxiety and anxious feelings are such a major problem in the modern and safe society. The amount of which we used before was useful, but now it's more of a burden. And unlike many other possessions we had before, we can't lose it away as easily. But yes, my overall message for anyone who feels like they have the anxiety issues or were told from others that they worry too much, let me assure you that even though your anxious feelings are coincidentally working against your favors, you are not flawed or mistaken. And in fact, considering the history of human development, you have a very strong connection with the inheritance your ancestors have given you. Okay, now that the history portion is covered, let's talk about the now what. I hope I've explained well about how if you don't easily feel anxious, good for you, despite the oddity of all that. And if you do frequently experience anxiety or anxious feelings, then you are at the very least functioning like you are meant to. But I'm also aware that there are always cases of having too much anxiety or anxious feelings. People who are having issues with anxiety will often say, well, my anxiety is a problem because I'm feeling too anxious to do anything at all. And I understand your concern. As much as I strongly claim the regularity of having anxiety, I also see how for many people this has become too much. Many people experience anxious feelings too much or too intensely that the emotion hinders them to function properly and perform tasks in life. Like I mentioned before, the recent intense development of humanity is acting as if it pulled a sudden brake and your anxious emotional state did not adjust to its speed with it, and now you flew forward and crashed through the front window. I'm sorry, that was a horrible example. Like it popped into my head just now. I didn't even write a script for that. But yes, I assume a lot of you have experienced this issue, the anxiety overflow, if you will. So now what will be the second topic talked in this video. In order for you to solve this issue of having too much anxiety in a specific situation, you can use the exposure technique. I've actually talked about this technique before, and you can learn about the detail of this technique by watching the other video called The Science of Exposure, How to Scientifically Overcome Your Fear. The link to this video is in the description, so once you finish watching this video, you should definitely go check it out. So to briefly explain the video and the exposure technique, this technique, you can use it to overcome any source of fear or anything that makes you anxious, and you do it by gradually shortening the distance between yourself and the target of your fear. If you get anxious of being social and talking to people, and you're like, there's no way I can be outgoing and make small talks and be extroverted, you can improve your social life by using the exposure technique. What you do is that for the first day, you simply think or read about two people having conversation. These people can totally be random people who you don't know or random characters from a story. And then you ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all and 10 being this is too much, how anxious did that make you feel? Two non-existent people whom you don't know talking with each other. My guess is that it didn't really make you feel anxious at all, right? It didn't remind you of your nervousness of talking to people because it's not related to your actions specifically or your feelings at all. Then you will up the level a bit and watch two or more people having a conversation on TV or in the real world and examine your level of anxiousness again. And then next, you go buy something from a store, preferably a store with a cashier who's an actual human, and actually speak with that person for the first time in this process when you're asked if you have a membership card or something. And you, as always, scale your feelings of anxiousness on the scale of 1 to 10 every time you advance the stage. And then for the next stage, you'll do the same thing, but this time ask the register, how's your day? And the cashier would probably say something like, oh, it's all right, or it's pretty usual, or something like that. And if they ask you, how's yours? You can just say good or pretty usual. Just a short reply with only few words. So yeah, for this stage, you actually initiate a conversation with that person, no matter how short it is. And then you scale how nervous or anxious you got when you did that. This is what the exposure technique is all about. You start with something that barely resembles the source of your anxiety or fear, and then slowly close the distance between yourself and that source. And while doing all this, you should score your level of anxiousness and how nervous you got on a 10-point scale. And then decide before doing all this, decide a point between 1 and 10 where you would probably start to feel anxious. So let's say you think that you will actually feel anxiety at point let's say 7, and then you start with stage 1 and you don't really feel anxiety until you reach 7, right? And once you've reached the level where you feel uncomfortable or anxious, then go back to the previous anxiety, the one you did right before you got nervous. So with my example, if you were fine when you were watching two real people talk, but you got anxious when you were the one who's actually talking, go back to watching two real people besides you talk until you start to feel like you're ready to become an active participant in the conversation. And repeat this process until you no longer feel uncomfortable at the activity that previously made you so. This is the essence of the exposure technique you can use to overcome feelings of anxiety at a certain source that make you nervous. But yeah, all of this is already said before, so in this video, I'll be talking about the opposite route, how you can use the exposure technique in the opposite direction to allow easier access to the thing that you want to make a habit out of. The exposure technique was originally made to solve anxiety issues, and it sure is a very useful technique. But if you try to do this by yourself without any assistance from a professional or even a peer, then at a certain point, you have the danger of hitting a wall. What usually happens at the beginning of you incorporating the exposure technique is that because you are not used to switching the mode from the usual anxious state to using the method, so you start practicing the exposure method for a few days in order to defend yourself against that one day of emergency and high anxiousness. And one day you go about your day as usual, and then something that makes you anxious, that exact event happens. You get yelled at by your boss at work, or it could be something totally unrelated from what makes you anxious. You could witness a disturbing accident that severely startles you because, it's a gruesome scene and it scares you and disturbs you. And then boom, anxiety kicks in and all your knowledge about the exposure technique gets thrown out the window because now you're in an anxious state. You're in a fight or flight mode. And because you still haven't had enough time to make the exposure technique into a habit, it makes you anxious. If you are super fearful of car accidents, but you've only been practicing the exposure technique for only a few days, and this is the first time since you started practicing this technique that you saw an actual car accident, you pretty much skipped a couple of important steps that was necessary in order to overcome this fear. Of course you'll feel the anxiety or fear or any other kind of negative emotions that you have. My point is that an unexpected situation on a level that you were not prepared for can certainly happen in life. And what can you do about that? Well, I have an answer for people who wondered about this as well. For people who worry about situations like this, you can use a technique called implementation intention, or the if-then rule. What is this? How can this help you? So the implementation intention, or the if-then rule, is basically you set yourself a certain rule that you do if and when a certain situation happens. If you're reading a book or something and suddenly you feel sleepy, you set yourself a rule that states, if I started feeling sleepy when I'm supposed to be reading, then I would take a quick nap for 10 minutes, and then once the alarm goes off, I will resume reading. I know that wasn't the most perfect plan in actuality, but you get the idea, right? You purposely set a rule for yourself and limit your actions in case an undesirable event happens, so that you can still go back to whatever you're doing before, even if you got off track for a moment. And real quick, I'm assuming that you've already watched the video that I've just recommended, so if you haven't already, I recommend you go watch it right now. Some things I'll be talking about from this point on might be confusing if you aren't already familiar with the if-then rule. So like I said before, life is rarely predictable. And particularly with the exposure technique, when you're supposed to overcome your fear or anxiety gradually, it works as a great method in case of an emergency, when you're still in stage 2 of your fear conquering quest, but something from stage 5 happens, for example, which obviously you're not ready for because you haven't gotten to that stage. And because you're not prepared for it, it'll obviously shake you off track and scare you. So you make a rule to yourself, if something from my fear conquering journey that I'm not ready for happens. So for example, if I'm trying to overcome the fear of asking for a raise from my scary boss, and currently I'm in the exposure stage where I'm simply imagining myself doing that. But since me and the scary boss both work in the same building, we'll have plenty of chances bumping into each other sometime in the day. That would be an emergency situation for me because I'm not ready to actually make a conversation with them. So I would set myself an if-then rule in which if I encounter the scary boss and I have no other choice but to make a conversation with them, then I would take a quiet but deep breath to calm myself down and ask, how's your day? Or another option would be if I encounter the scary boss and I have no other choice but to talk to him, then I would spot something from his outfit that I can make a conversation out of. So if I knew a thing or two about luxury watches, and when I saw my boss, I spotted him wearing a watch that I know of. So I could start a conversation by saying, that's a very nice watch you got there. I love your Vacheron Constantin. And then if he goes, oh, you're a fan too? I'm a big fan of this brand. I personally invest in this company. At this point, you're already a step above everyone else when it comes to making a rapport with your boss, because you're having an actual active conversation on a topic that your boss is at least somewhat interested in. One thing to watch out for when you're not exactly an expert yourself in the topic of conversation you initiated is when the other person's like a super expert about the topic. So you accidentally press the aficionado activate button in your boss by talking about a watch brand, and he starts going full on about the specific part of the watch is tailor made, and the color is also premium, and the specific location of where it was made and all that. He overwhelms you with info about the topic, assuming that you can keep up with his expert talk. Now you're in trouble. What should you do? This is another topic for a future video that I haven't posted yet, so I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to wait for that a little longer. And also I realized that I've severely driven off the main topic of this video, but I hope at least it helped you figure out how you should view your anxious feelings. And I know I said that I would also talk about the specific careers you can choose based on how much anxious feelings you have in certain situations, but I've noticed that I rambled on for a lot in this video, and I'm really supposed to be going somewhere and I'm already late for it, so I'm gonna have to make you wait a little bit. I promise for sure this will be the very next video I'll talk about in this channel. But lastly, I do have recommendations that you can view right after this video ends. First, I'll start with the video recommendation from this channel, which is called Ideal Jobs for Anxious People. If you are interested in this video and want to know more about specific careers for anxious people, one that I forgot to talk about in this video, this one can definitely serve as an introduction that you can watch to learn about the broad areas of career options you have as a person who has anxiety. But I will be making a video about this specific topic next time with more details you can get from. So I'll recommend another video that kind of talks about how you can, I guess, apply the knowledge you gain through this video in the actual business setting, when you're actually talking with someone who you want to make a good impression of yourself. But I'm a weirdo, so I'll introduce you to a sort of an inverse topic of social interaction, particularly when you've already made some sort of rapport with your boss. So you're already making good enough conversation with them, and then one day they ask you or offer you to do something like a lead in a project of some kind, or maybe even something personal like helping out with their children's birthday party. And of course this means that your boss trusts you and thinks you can successfully accomplish this, so this is a very good sign and you're delighted. But there's just one issue: you can't do it because you have other plans for that day, or you simply wanted to spend the day free of chores. Whatever it is, you have to decline that offer. But how could I reject an offer, especially from someone who's higher in position than me and who I should be helping out whenever I can and be friendly with? What if I lose the trust that I have with my boss because of me declining this offer? To people like you who thought of this, I highly suggest watching this video. It talks about exactly this: how to decline a favor or an offer from someone who you want to stay in touch and still keep a good relationship with. The link to the video is in my description, so right after you finish watching this video, or right after you make a good relationship with your boss, I suggest you go watch that video. And then for a book recommendation, let's see, since I've talked specifically about the overall view of anxiety in this video, that's the title of this video at least, so I suggest you read a book called The Upside of Your Dark Side: Why Being Your Whole Self, Not Just Your Good Self, Drives Success and Fulfillment. by Todd Kashdan and Robert Biswas-Diener. If you're not already familiar with this title, then I feel like it'll bring you a lot of hope and a feeling of promise that when it comes to managing your emotional state, some amount of negativity can help a lot in life. Despite enough people claiming the significance of thinking positively or the importance of keeping negative feelings away from you, well, scientifically, negative thinking and negative emotions like anxiety can be tweaked really easily and can be used to bring positive outcomes. Case in point, even though you've constantly thought negatively about your physical health and your physical attractiveness, you could tweak this negative emotion and think that I'm thinking so much about how I look, so it could mean that I'm really considerate about my physical attractiveness. Of course, this alone won't do. Just thinking about it will only make you more miserable, but because you realize yourself that you are really considerate about how you look, if you can successfully connect this negative emotion to an action to, for example, go to the gym. So if you can connect this thought from, okay, because I'm so conscious about my body image, I might be able to become a harsh but healthy critic when I actually start hitting the gym. So once I start making exercise into a routine, I might be able to become really diligent with when, where, and how I should be working out. I can do all this because I've always spotted where I'm lacking and needs improvement. I'm confident that I'll be able to easily spot what I'm doing wrong so I can make adjustments accordingly. I know that was a very rough example, but I think you got my message. Your negative emotions can be used to your advantage. Your negativity can help you out. To learn more about this topic, you should also go read The Upside of Your Dark Side: Why Being Your Whole Self, Not Just Your Good Self, Drives Success and Fulfillment by Todd Kashdan and Robert Biswas-Diener. It's a relatively short book, so you should all go ahead and read it out. And that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it helped you a lot. If you thought this was helpful, then please do me a great favor and support this channel by liking the video and subscribing to Life Study Library. This was your host, Yosh, and I'll see you in another video. Happy birthday!